original dawn of it all goes back to baldcore. Now, baldcore is a phylum of low follicle count fiction that is trying to tell the story of bald men. It originally occurred to me on a certain forum where someone asked, is male pattern baldness a tragedy? And to me, I think it's an undisputed tragedy.
Welcome back to the Unreal Press podcast. I'm Miles McNaughton, and today my guest is David Herod, the esteemed editor of Tookie's magazine, a substack about the plight of the dreaded modern. That means you, dear listener. David, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, great to be here, Miles.
So, the question that's burning on everyone's mind, obviously, is what exactly is Tookie's?
Tookie's Mag is a project about the plight of the dreaded modern. That means you, dear listener. It's about the man who has had to live post-2008 in a Western country and has probably not as much money as his father had, isn't as successful, probably doesn't have the best, as good prospects, but is finding some joy in the insanity of it all. There's a bit of an emphasis on humor, fiction, nonfiction. We try to look at stories of men as they really live, as opposed to the hyper reality, nightmare, hellscape, daydream that we sometimes picture ourselves in our minds or on our computers when we post on Twitter with a bodybuilder with laser eyes.
So instead of living all the time on the internet, you kind of are aiming to bring a sense of reality to a very filtered world.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I'd say it's a little bit of a cliche, but a big goal of the project is the search for authenticity in our current era. I think a lot of people can relate to watching a movie or a TV show, or maybe not watching any for the last few years like I have, or even reading a lot of short fiction in a literary journal, and just not feeling connected to it, and having this sense that even if it's not necessarily a story about a superhero, it feels equally fictitious. It feels like I'm looking at someone describe a different world, even though they're pretending it's the one that I'm living in. And it's something that I experience a lot. It's kind of to pull an Andrew Tate and have a Matrix quote. It's the splinter in my mind when I'm reading stories or watching a show or something. And I know that's not what the world looks like when I step outside. It's sort of I see a hall of mirrors of a 1990s stage director, staffing person in Hollywood, what they thought the world looked like then, and somehow it's projected forward into our era, and I'm seeing the same thing on repeat, even though when I walk out my door, it's a completely different story. And I would like to hear more about the story that I actually experience and the other men experience. The men that actually make our society run, the people that in our most recent piece, staff hospitals, our guards in hospitals, men who are, trying to find a mate, trying to get a hot date, but maybe don't have the highest confidence. I'm more interested in those kinds of stories than the sort of the false ones I see a lot. And I have one in mind when I'm talking about this that was a bit of an instigating factor actually in getting off my butt and starting to actually post some pieces. It was a story about a taxi driver, and I may have actually shared this one with you, Miles. It was the story of a taxi driver, a fictional story. The taxi driver picks up a fare, and the man ends up, forcing him to drive around. It just felt totally false to me. They talk about these street walking prostitutes. The speaker is sort of voiced as a urbanite white man, and it's just not my experience. Whenever I've picked up a taxi in 2023, it's not been an urbanite college educated white man driving it. That's for sure. It's usually a Middle Eastern man or an Indian man that's behind the wheel. And it's just, and the streetwalker image is something straight out of what's that De Niro film?
Taxi Driver.
Taxi Driver. Thank you. It's something straight out of Taxi Driver, and just is again not what I see in 2023.
So you prefer a more realistic sense of the world. You don't see much of the romanticism or the idealization, let's say, of the modern man. You prefer, hey, this is how men are in terms of just the natural state of things.
I would maybe argue that I am a romantic in a way, because I do think there's beauty in the way we actually are and in the stories that we are living, and that the tragedy of our age is that we're not telling the stories that we're actually living. And a perfect example of that is the last few years. I know this is going on YouTube, so I'll be careful with maybe the phrasing. Let me know if I should not be as careful. But, there was a bad cough going around a year or two back, and there has been no great fiction or hardly any fiction that talks about it. And in fact, if I go to two of my neighbors and bring it up, they're probably going to have radically different ideas of what just happened and how it happened. Completely different realities, in fact, than I have. And so I think that's part of the issue is we're so socially incohesive, incoherent that we can't even have these conversations. And the art is kind of a reflection of that. As our society is becoming totally incoherent is the term that comes to mind again. And it's actually one of the core tenets of the kind of writing I'm interested in is capturing the incoherence of our current time period that we're living through and trying to explain the search for meaning and the search for what is good in life in a time period where we don't exactly know who we are as people, and as a society there isn't a society anymore. We've been broken into this what do they call it, the digital archipelago of all the Internet of Things, and it results in this society that can't produce art and doesn't have a base for the art. I even think in terms of book sales, so this is probably one of the main factors in plummeting book sales, because if you think about a book, in terms of a piece of entertainment, it's probably one of the higher time commitments, maybe one of the most high time commitment activities you can take, compared to, say a movie or a film or a 15-minute YouTube video or a 5-second TikTok, nightmare person with their eyes batting and long lashes. A book is a big commitment. And to undertake that, you want to have some guarantee of social reward, meaning, and quality. But in a society where there's no sense of what is good and what is bad, and there's no stakes in that way, I think people shut off. And it's, in addition to just dopamine addiction, I think it's one of the huge driving factors. Maybe this is a chicken and egg thing with dopamine addiction, but it's a huge driving factor in people moving away from long form entertainment, and novels, and even written form short stories, things that are more focused like that, and towards these, shorter fix type entertainment that at the same time also, because of its brevity, creates I think has a higher propensity to give us false images and false relationships with people that aren't real and with situations that aren't real. And again, it comes back to this sense of hyper reality. I think I've spoken to you before about how you go to Walmart and you have a bunch of hideous schlubs walking around you, but then all of you, after you get out of that checkout line, go home. You log onto your computers, and one of you is 1488 man, and one of you is Stalin's left hand of darkness man, and you live these complete alternate lives, these fake lives, as opposed to the real story. There is the walking into Walmart, the less glamorous but more enduring part of it.
Right. So there's a idea nowadays in the internet that it's sort of moving away from a mass appeal media. I mean, for example, Weird Al Yankovic no longer releases albums because in the time that will take him to write an album, all the songs there will be old news.
Mm-hmm.
So he has actually moved away from producing albums and only releases singles now directly, because he realizes that people are moving away from mass consumption models, even as late as 10 years ago, to more micro niches in the world. So in terms of talking about micro niches and living second lives, let's talk about, how did Tookies exactly come about in your mind? I mean, what prompted the creation of the magazine?
So the original dawn of it all goes back to baldcore. Now, baldcore is a phylum of low follicle count fiction that is trying to tell the story of bald men. It originally occurred to me on a certain forum where someone asked, is male pattern baldness a tragedy? And to me, I think it's an undisputed tragedy, but there was some discussion on it. And so I decided to write a short story trying to ponder on the topic. And I even went so far as to write some tenets of baldcore, which is, if you're comfortable with that, I'd like to read you the tenets of baldcore.
Oh, please, by all means.
So baldcore has emphasis on the predestined outcomes due to world-driven incentives, themes of male disempowerment, obviously the baldness being a metaphor of that, racial and spiritual incoherence of setting, which I think goes back to, basically it's a little bit of the Hollywood or the Amazon rule of no two white people in a room, but for different reasons. Again, this is a little bit goes back to my life in my 20s and my experience of what life is like. Post 2008 culture and technology, in an honest way. So, no horror movie. Oh, gee, cell phones went out. But also, I'm not interested in stories about people just being on their phones or through the lens of identities through such things. To me, I want to see the meat space. Those are the interesting stories. And then the last one I have, and this is the one that gets the most rancor from certain edgelords: no scapegoats. Nobody voted for this. And my reasoning there is that I really want the emphasis to be on the individual that the story, either nonfiction or fiction, is about. And to do that, I think a more complex and interesting story acknowledges the humanity of everyone, and also that all of us are extremely powerless in the situation of a post-industrial sort of degrading society, and we're all just trying to make it. So those are the tenets of baldcore that those are the rules nailed to my front door, sir, and I will stand by them.
So baldcore and this idea of the post-industrial falling apart society, do you see Tookies as like a lifeline? Do you see it as sort of fiddling as the Titanic sinks? What's the goal for Tookies?
I would say it's very much fiddling while the Titanic sinks, which may sound damning, but I don't think there's a lot we can do about this sinking Titanic. I think we're in a bit of a bind, and so I think there is practical things we can do, but I don't view Tookies as a place to discuss that in great detail. I see it more as a place to share ideas and to share experiences, and hopefully bring us all closer to the truth. And I guess just create art, because ultimately I think the goal of any writer or artist is just something is create something engaging. I heard a really good quote actually from a man named G.M. Baker, who's a indie historical fiction author. He defined art as a question, and the question is, do you see it? And so that's something that's been playing in my mind a lot. So everything I write to an audience and everything I read as an audience, what is the thing I'm being asked if I see, or what is the thing I want them to either see or to wonder if they're seeing when they're engaging with it. And I guess what I want people to see is all of us, since I'm not immune to these hyper reality daydreams that we're all in. I have my niche and bias, and I think I'm right about everything, but hopefully by having more practical art, I think we can bring ourselves closer to reality and the the world that our ancestors probably knew much better by not being so plugged into it.
To turn a phrase, get out and touch grass.
touch the grass. Yeah. I think that's that is a part of it for sure.
So, speaking of touching grass, there's a lot of men's magazines out there that encourage, men to go outside and smell the roses and join a gun club or something. But what would you say differentiates Tookies from like a run-of-the-mill men's magazine? There's obviously a lot of immediate differences. Tookies is more of an observation of, hey, we're all on this sinking ship together, so let's fiddle and wait for the ice to set in. But what would you say is Tookie's like core separation from just regular men's magazines?
I think a lot of men's magazines go broader. I think we're probably narrow and deeper is the goal for it. In terms of the themes I've been discussing, I think the goal is to be laser focused on them rather than covering anything from current events or fitness. I think I even have some sarcastic comments about that, about future articles in the our about section. About ball shaving and that kind of thing. So that's
oh yeah,
that's not anything I'm interested in. I think there's I don't want to shit on anyone, but the Art of Manliness. I would, if you're familiar with that site, I know that was big with the handlebar mustache era of was it 2012 or whatever. Yeah, that's a direction I really am not interested in. I think any kind of lifestyle or things like that is almost getting into I'm a salesman. I'm selling you something, and I would say Tookie's it has the facade of a gentleman's magazine, but underneath that, I think it's a place of just trying to make real connected art to a world that we're not very well connected to, the real world and the experiences of other people, men in particular. There's a focus on the male point of view just because I don't think I could balance both, and also because I feel like men are a little underserved in the world of literature and especially in literary magazines and things of that kind of orientation.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you can get an email from Publishers Lunch sent for to your inbox every single day, and you will notice that almost every single name in that email will be a female. Now, this is not really surprising. Females consume way more reading than men do, especially in the modern age. But it kind of, especially for people in our line of work, makes us feel, I'd say, left out, like forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure some of it is due to piracy, which I'll put my hand up and admit to that. Men tend to get a lot of free books as opposed to women.
I condemn, for any federal agents listening, I condemn and do not condone.
I don't say it's good. I'm not saying to do it, but I've heard of certain last letter in the alphabet libraries that can help you with things like that. But I do think it's more than that. To your point, there's a political angle. There's it's part of the program that our overlords are pushing. It's a very female oriented. The feminine is good, the masculine is naturally bad. And at the same time, I'm not interested in, nanny boo boo, girls stink, boys rule talk at all, or hyper masculine, like I mentioned earlier, I'm not as interested in Twitter posters with Greco-Roman bodies with laser eyes. God, no. Yeah.
Or like Andrew Tate.
To me, those people are feeding on the carcass. Those are the people they're really digging in and doubling down on the negative behavior loops that are driving a sort of societal decay. And if anything, I'd kind of like to lampoon people like that. Yeah, I certainly have been having a few laughs at Andrew Tate, so it's been a pleasure.
Well, you sound like a guy who's active on Twitter, and I know most writers usually use Twitter because it's necessary. But what do you think? Is it necessary for the magazine, or do you love it?
I absolutely hate Twitter. It's addictive, and at the same time completely unproductive, and it's not even good at getting you eyeballs unless you have the right friends, I suppose. I've gotten a bit of traction on one or two things I put up. I've had zero. I have nothing good to say about it. But at the same time, I think I'm stuck there because, to your point, everyone's on there. There's this feeling that things are happening there. I don't know if there's a way completely off it. I think I'm going to stick with it for a while at least to see if anything picks up momentum. But there's a certain element of you're begging for money at the poorhouse if you're in Twitter too, because if you're offering critiques and criticisms like I am, but then at the same time I'm on Twitter and I'm begging for likes and attention, there's a certain falseness there, and then the audience you're attracting also is false. So there's a certain contradiction in trying to use a platform like that to share what I consider to be a positive message. And so I don't know. I guess I'm a hypocrite because I'm going to stay on, hope for a few clicks, a few updates.
Well, grifters attract grifters, right? But the hardest part always has been selling your story and finding your audience. Even though the internet is as balkanized as it is now, it's actually a lot easier to find your micro niches. I mean, you're here on the podcast, right? You've got people who hopefully have subscribed to your magazine. By the way, you can go to tookies.substack.com and subscribe to his magazine while you're watching the podcast. I'm sure
thanks for the shout out.
I'm sure Dave would really appreciate that. But you've got the ability to find your micro niche, and it's not, a Stephen King sized audience. It's not a Charles Dickens sized audience. I mean, those kinds of people are, for lack of a better term, astronomical. They're just completely different. But the advantage of having something like a Twitter space is that even though you have to beg for views and beg for people to share your content, you can still find somebody out there who's willing to engage with you. And if you can do that and build up momentum after several years, you might have something positive.
I'd agree. There's a lot of benefits to it, as much of a negative Nelly as I can be. The ability to connect with people through these networks is really powerful. At the same time, it is toxic ultimately, because I think it's pulling us away from more real experiences. But I think that's the age we live in, and I don't think there's any easy solution to it. I think we have to play by those rules. And I will say I've had a few more prominent people say sort of kind things and supportive things. So yeah, I'm optimistic that there is an audience out there for this. But at the same time, for me, I'm doing it largely for myself and the people that have submitted to me. I think similarly, I think they found value in making what they made and sharing it with although small now, an interested audience. And I think there's a lot of value in that, even if maybe some of these messages aren't as palatable to a large number of people, right? Like there's an interesting concept of the honesty frontier that I heard Nate Hagen speak about recently, who's another great, interesting thinker to follow. So the whole concept of the honesty frontier is at every layer of an audience increasing in size and in relative to whether they're in your tribe or out of your tribe, you lose say like 10-20% of honesty from any conversation. So by way of example, let's say I have a mother-in-law, hypothetically, who I don't like. To myself, maybe my unspoken reason for not liking her is that she reminds me of maybe a lack of success in my life. That maybe I'm not where she and her husband were at their point in their life. But I'm probably only 90% honest with myself, because we all have biases and certain egos that we want to protect. So at that level of speaking, I'll probably only admit to myself, oh, she's rude. She's a little too, blunt with certain things. But then if I increase that audience size to maybe like an internal Twitter following or this kind of community, I can probably be 80% honest, because there's certain things I can't share just to protect myself, but then also to be impressive. But then when you go to a larger audience, it's like a Stephen King sized audience, there's just a lot of things you just cannot say, because you're going to get they'll reject it, especially in the modern world with the cancel culture type issues. But you run into the issue of, especially with the honesty frontier, people have competing interests. And so if you offer a criticism of, say, some things I've been saying about Twitter use, or some of the things I've been saying about maybe like multiculturalism type ideas, there's people with really a lot of skin in the game towards those things. And you will self-moderate to that size audience naturally. And then if you don't self-moderate, you will be moderated by the society itself. And that's the concept of the honesty frontier that I've that's another one I've been thinking about a better way to condense in an article, actually, to express as I think that's another factor in modern book sales collapsing, actually, because especially with the incoherence of modern society in terms of demographics, language, age, and all these things. The honesty frontier is actually getting exponentially worse, because there are more stakeholders, more tribes that you're speaking across tribal lines with any given comment, which is probably another reason why Twitter is a little bit of a dangerous place, because especially if your real name and information is connected to it, we've seen people get completely destroyed over a single comment, or like that one guy got caught looking at naked pictures of what was it, like a CGI head of Pokemon or whatever.
I remember when there was he was looking up tentacle porn on X hentai, and then once people caught his tab was open, he was like, "Oh, I'm trying to explain to my kids and my wife how weird it is," yes. And it just made it worse, because like, why are you showing your family porn?
Yeah, exactly. Those things, and those ones are actually funny too, because some of them get protected if they moderate the language after, and if they're inside the inner party, as it were. Yeah. Like, who was that guy on CNN that got caught with his dick down? And then he comes back like 6 months later. Same with the guy who directed, not Avengers, the stupid space raccoon one,
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Thank you. Yes. That guy, he was another one. They brought him back 6 months later. He spoke the party line well enough, even if he went off script once. But for people like us, we have to recognize that we're not. Joss Whedon, yeah, he's had a few too. Yeah, he's had some bad allegations. But again, he toes the line in the right places, and so he's allowed to come back from that. But again, the whole concept of the honesty frontier is more towards the normal person, as opposed to someone who is I guess we'd say like an accepted part of the inner circle, though even they're subject to it. And I think it affects the way they speak, and it's one of the main reasons why I think we're so much less honest with each other, is because of the increasing incoherence of our country's population.
So what do you see as the primary advantage of using Substack? We've talked about, Twitter's a great space for this and that, and it's also terrible. You've obviously chosen to put your magazine on Substack. This is a 4chan adjacent podcast, so everyone here should be familiar with the literature board on 4chan. We've got a couple former magazines on there. There's the Mini Mag, there was Lamp, and then there was the Lit Quarterly. What made you choose a Substack versus a magazine on one of those?
For me, it was just ease of distribution, ease of setup, and you have some network effect with Substack. I've heard mixed things about how effective it actually is. I've had some middling success with people subscribing after following from their banners or their recommended features. I would say it's not nearly as good as a YouTube in terms of engagement, so that's a downside. And it's actually one of the reasons. Something I'm experimenting with is we have a YouTube channel as well. You can find you just search Tooky's Mag on YouTube, and we're starting to upload some recordings that from certain pieces. I don't think I have the work ethic to get everything into a YouTube video, but just for the ability to get more eyeballs and more attention, because Substack it's at the moment, I think something they're working on. It's a little bit more isolated than a major site such as YouTube or Twitter. But at the same time, there's more sticking power from the people I've seen on there. The click to sub ratio is much higher on Substack than it is on YouTube, where you get for every, I don't know what the number is for you guys, but yeah, it's for every 50, 80, 100 people or whatever, you get like one sub. It's wild. And then a lot of people just bounce off in 2 seconds. There's a lot more people just flipping through videos at a really rapid pace, experimenting, seeing what they like, which is good for getting some new people, but it's there's not as much sticking power on YouTube.
So YouTube is a site normally for like single personalities. So let's talk about the personality behind Tookies. Let's talk about David himself. As a writer, every writer has favorite authors that they read when they were growing up, or personal inspirations for their prose or for their content. So who are some of your inspirations?
In terms of inspiration, not necessarily I've read the most words from them, but in pure inspiration, probably P.G. Wodehouse and Gene Wolfe, I would say, are probably the ones that when I think of writing that I find interesting, they're probably really high up there. In terms of theme, I'm a big fan of reading historical journals and travelogues, and so I find a lot of inspiration from reading things like that. I recommend a lot The Diary of Nicholas Cresswell, and there's a journal from my name is Jacques Couture, I believe that's how you say his name. Different eras, but just they had very different travel experiences. One in the United States, one in Asia. I'd say that those are four books that really made an impact on me.
You find yourself using these stories for inspiration, or are they just sort of, this forms the core foundation of a lot of my writing?
I find a lot of the spirit of P.G. Wodehouse. I don't even know if that's how you pronounce his name. It might be Wodehouse. I've always said Wodehouse. I've always found his sort of humor and spirit to be something I've wanted to emulate and kind of carry on in my own way. Gene Wolfe is more, as people that have read him, just the beauty of his prose. I find really inspirational, especially in works the length his tend to be. And for the journals, I would say it's more subject matter that I find interesting and the way people viewed the world then. Kind of going back to the hyper reality blah blah I went on, the way people viewed the world in the past, prior to say the 1950s, it was just completely different. And in some ways, the only way we can experience it right now, people that grew up in this period, is to read older texts from people that lived then. And some people like the more high-minded philosophical texts, but I really enjoy the sort of down-to-earth, man-on-the-street texts.
So in terms of yourself, you talk about the beauty of Gene Wolfe's prose. I want to give a hard choice for you. Prose and style, or plot and characters? Which one do you think? Which one do you prefer?
I'm gonna betray my boy Gene and say I think I'm gonna come down the side of plot and characters. And my reasoning is this, and I want to go ahead and I'm going to go quote the big dogs, Aristotle, Rhetoric, Book 3. You might know exactly what I'm referencing. There's a certain quote about those that practice this artifice of fiction, prose fiction writing, must conceal it to avoid the appearance of speaking artificially instead of naturally. For that which is artificial, and I wrote this down because I knew you were going to get this. For that which is natural persuades, but the artificial does not. For men become suspicious of one whom they think to be laying traps for them, as they are of mixed wines. And so I like flowing and beautiful prose, and I do attempt it at times. But I think if you have to go with one, especially for anything longer form, I think ultimately it comes down to what the plot is and the story is about. And the beauty of it is nice, but it's not the point as it is with poems and song or hymn in those cases.
Right. I mean, ask yourself this: would you rather read Finnegan's Wake or Latro in the Mist?
Oh God, I think I'd still take Latro. I don't know. I'm going to sell myself out.
No, I mean, because Finnegan's Wake is all prose and style. Its plot and its characters are argued about to this day. I mean, you can write a whole PhD about what Finnegan's Wake was about. But Latro in the Mist has a very defined plot and characters, doesn't have the prose or the style of Finnegan's Wake. But again, you ask yourself the question, would I rather read Finnegan's Wake or Latro in the Mist? And I think almost handily I would probably pick Latro in the Mist. I
find Latro in the Mist story structure really annoying, though. I really hate the device of the tablet. If I'm thinking of the right book, right? That's the one, he's the Greek
yes.
Yeah, soldier, and he has to brand the tablet every day. Gene Wolfe is actually, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship in some ways. I find some of his gimmicks is not the right word, but I find some of his mechanics extremely aggravating. He loves the story stuck in the middle of a story a little too much. He had a few that drove me a little batty, like Fifth Head of Cerberus. I was probably like the most egregious example of that. If you've read that one, I recently learned it was 3 novellas that were like merged into one at some point. So it wasn't even planned that way. It was a bit of a publishing rearranging arrangement they had.
I think Gene Wolfe was he preferred to write in the evenings, if I remember my Gene Wolfe lore correctly. How about yourself? Do you prefer working at night, or do you prefer to work in the morning?
Actually, I'm more of a morning person for writing. I like to do the wagey thing of opening something up at about 10 o'clock and powering through it if I have a little time. But usually I end up splitting it, to be honest, just because of the way my life is right now. I usually do a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the afternoon or later evening.
What do you think is the best way to write? A lot of authors swear up and down by the morning. The first thing you do when you get up is grab the pen. What do you think is the best approach?
I think you can do it at any point. I've heard stories of people that do it on buses. I can't imagine that. But if you get yourself in the habit, it's all about having the ritual of it. It's all about having a mental wind down into sort of that quasi dream state to hopefully put down ideas that are interesting and in a good way. And then when needed, flipping into edit mode and cleaning it up.
Oh yeah, you gotta have an appreciation for editing. It's always ticks me off that people groan when they have to go and edit. It is the best part of writing. It's the most fun part.
Oh, I didn't realize you were an editor, pro editor. I love editing too.
I actually prefer it a lot of times to writing. I love writing, but being able to read through what you already have written and massage the text and make it flow better and start stretching out her paragraphs and getting rid of all the useless junk ideas and appreciating the good sentences. It's just so much fun.
Yeah. No, I think that's where really the shine comes in. I almost don't even like obviously there are different activities, but some people I think feel self-conscious when they're editing as if they're not being productive, right? And I think editing is writing at the end of the day. You're still engaging those same muscles, even if it's not as free flow, and yet your ideas aren't shifting as quickly. You're repeating the same line a few times, hopefully reading it out loud, which is something I see people forget to do a lot, so that you understand the sort of the feel for the language. Yeah, I 100% agree. I think it's the most fun and rewarding, especially if you can. I think you need to define what your editing process is. Maybe that's what people don't have, that don't enjoy it. Because for me, it's like checking off boxes, and it activates that part of my mind.
I think I find editing just such a relaxing sort of thing to flow into. You get a little bit of music going if you want. You'll read a sentence, say, okay, this is kind of what I'm looking for, but I want to rewrite it like this instead. Or this is I'm sort of feeling this imagery, but it'd be better if it was this instead.
Oh yeah, and then cut out half of it if it sucks. Which can be relieving, actually. It's like popping a pimple.
You can't be afraid to cut out entire chapters. I cut out the last third of one of the books that I was working on because I ended up redrafting the entire plot, and the last third ended up being pointless. I had to rewrite the whole thing.
Oh God.
So we've talked a lot about Tookies. We've talked a lot about long-form fiction writing. Do you have any other works that are Do you have any other books that are in the works? Something you can tell us about?
I have a few things. Nothing coming out anytime soon. I have a novelette that I think is hopefully going to come out later this year. I'm not even sure what to do with it exactly. Funny enough, it's actually my initial entry for the recent Unreal horror anthology, but I ended up losing control of it, and it ran a lot longer than what I was allowed to write, which is a sort of post-apocalyptic, post-environmental catastrophe apocalypse, sort of a bit grounded. It's actually funny enough, it's a little bit inspired by the Legend of Sleepy Hollow and the Journal of Nicholas Cresswell I referenced earlier. Some of those ideas were definitely playing in my head with that. I have a longer novel. I've just finished a manuscript of it that's fantasy. It actually started out as a Morrowind fan fiction. Funny enough, I posted it back on a certain writing general almost a year ago, and I got some positive feedback and just kept writing on it. Just something I wrote a lot of. It just was a lot of fun. I probably just put it out for free as a sort of a love letter to a gaming community that I was part of and kind of connected to for a long time. And I also have the first third of a novel. I was a bit of an idiot. I started getting more serious about writing a year or so back. Earlier, I've always dabbled in it, but I really was buckling down, and I was writing. For some reason, I thought it made sense to write a chapter of a novel, a different novel every week. So I would cycle back between two. Have you ever tried that, Miles, or something similar?
I have always been juggling multiple projects. Right now, I've got 3 short stories and 4 books that I'm working on about in tangent.
How do you do that?
Honestly, I pick a project at a time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't judge you because I'm a little bit in a similar situation. I have these 3 things, plus I have Tookies with like a series of short stories always cooking. Maybe it's sort of an ADD issue because I can't work on any particular story for more than maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and then I need something fresh, which is a little bit of the origin of Tookies is building up a backlog of some of these ideas and stories. I just need a short story just to get something fresh out of my system. And a lot of the things I'm interested in writing is kind of that more humorous, contemporary kind of vibe. Yeah, it's just I couldn't handle it. Going back and forth every week is a total gear shift. The historical fiction one it's like a sort of Copper Age historical fiction. Very, I'd say, higher language. It's third omniscient, kind of that energy. And then the fantasy was just first person, kind of wacky, fun genre stuff. Like really, going all for sort of humor and that kind of thing. So it was the tonal shift killed me, and I could not do it. So I was like, all right, I'm just gonna buckle and work on this one, and then do shorts on the side, and come back to it later.
That's what I ended up doing for a lot of my work. I find that my mood obviously influences what I want to write about. So if I'm in a bad or a depressed mood, I don't want to work on, let's say, my satire. So I won't work on that for a little while. But if I want to work on the satire because I had good ideas, I got to get myself in the funny mood. So I find that as long as I have multiple projects going in tandem, I'll always have something to work on that excites me. And sure, some projects get put on the wayside, put on the back burners for a couple of weeks, but you always come back to them. Mm-hmm. I find with projects that I don't enjoy or don't have a satisfaction with, I end up leaving them for a long time, and then I don't care if I come back to them. So I put them in a folder or I delete them and forget about them. But for projects that I can't get rid of because I know, like, this is a story I want to write, I just don't want to write it right now, mm-hmm. I just leave them, and it's like, okay, I'm ready to get back to it now.
It's building that habit that you have the confidence you will come back to it. For me, that was the big change. Because a lot of, myself, I think a lot of people have been experiencing this, where you write feverishly for a short period and then you burn out. But I think it's building that daily habit, whether it's morning, afternoon, night, or you vary it, by day. For me, I have no fear that I'm not going to finish the stories that I have laid out. It's just a matter of time. Funny enough, that one of the big things that helped me with that was crypto investing. I may have already told you this one, but very into that kind of scene a while back, and I ended up putting my life savings, pretty much my entire family's life savings, into an altcoin, sort of at a certain point in the bull market, and I put it all on a bank called Celsius. Are you familiar with Celsius?
I am not.
Okay, it's a bank that collapsed, and they anyone that had money in it doesn't have any money anymore. So I put all my money into an altcoin at the peak of a bull market, and it actually worked out pretty well. And thank God I actually moved it off Celsius before they collapsed. But the endorphin rush, the dopamine hits of that experience, because it was there at the peak, then it crashed, then things bounced, and for me, it completely fried my brain in a way I cannot go back to video games, which was one of my big temptations before. And I found that was, if you can replicate that for anyone struggling to write, that's my suggestion. Just go balls to the wall with some insane investment scheme that you're probably going to lose all your money on. And hopefully it works out for you somewhat. Like I was able to get mine out, but yeah, that was my cure.
Well, so speaking of that, you've obviously been writing for a long time. If you could tell any new writer anything, what would it be? I mean, everyone wishes there was something that they knew when they first started writing. For me, I wish I knew to just read a lot more than I ever did previously, to make sure that I read consistently, find books, read who you want to write like. So if there's any kind of advice you would give to someone who's just starting out, someone who's thinking of a Substack or thinking of starting to get their feet wet for the first time in writing, what would you tell them?
I would say the big three would be building the habit, like I said, a daily habit, and not sweating word count. You know, if it's 100 words you get a day, that's fine. You know, you're going to build up eventually, but it's just getting that, the daily chipping away at the rock. So that'd be the first one. Studying craft on the side. And so that includes just really simple things like listening to podcasts while you're driving your car, washing the dishes. There's a lot of really awful writing podcasts because writers tend to be very awful people. No offense to your listeners or present company.
They're all terrible people.
I did enjoy the one I like, and I know people are going to, bag on me for this. The Brandon Sanderson writing guide. I actually mostly like that.
It was good.
Yeah, it's worth it, especially as a beginner. That one, and then Shaylin writes on YouTube. Those are the two I tend to recommend people. Sort of her stuff in the last 2 years. They have some decent writing craft, really nice beginner stuff. To take you through from A to Z. And then the last one I would say would be, well, maybe there's two parts to this third one. To go back to our earlier comment that editing is writing. And so that everything you write, you should then exhaustively edit in solitude first by reading it out loud, because all written language is derivative of spoken language. It's merely trying to capture it. And so that has a lot of implications in terms of, the poetics and in terms of what, everything else. But what it means to me most importantly is you should be reading your writing, seeing how it sounds, how would you respond to it as a listener, and then editing it accordingly. And you should be reading and editing everything you write several times where you even think of sharing it for critique. And at some point, I think you should ask for critique. I know that there's some people that are anti-critique, but I've always found it extremely helpful. You have to take it with a big grain of salt, because critiquers, you don't know where they're coming from. If it's online, some of them are insane psychopaths that probably just want to hurt your feelings. But a lot of people will give you, even if it's not the most detailed, they'll give you a real person's perspective that you should consider as, the person that does not own the story, but that had a reaction to it. So I guess those would be my three tips of, or at least things that have helped me: building the habit, continually studying craft, for God's sake, guys, we gotta get these semicolons under control.
They're not that hard.
They're not that hard. It's a period, guys. Just treat it like a period, or better yet, just don't use it until you're ready. There's no harm. That would be my little rant for the day.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about?
No, thank you. Just you can follow us at tookies.substack.com for our Substack. You can follow us on Twitter at tookiesmag, and on YouTube as well. Tookie, just look up Tookie's Mag, you'll find us. And if you have any interest in the kind of themes and ideas that I've mentioned, whether it's nonfiction, fiction, some kind of weird poetry, feel free to send it my way. Obviously, I'm we're not some high and mighty lit mag. We're interested in the real stories of the kind of people in this sphere. So I'd love to have some more submissions. We post twice a month, so we're not going to clog your inbox if that's a concern. We focus on just having a slow but steady flow of content.
And if you're interested in following the Unreal Press, you can find us on YouTube. You can also find us at _Unreal_Press on Twitter. You can also join our Discord and see what we're all about. We just put out a brand new horror anthology based off of the Weird Tales pulp magazine from the 1950s. The cover art looks phenomenal, and the tales are second to none. We are now open year-round for any tales that you want to put in for the next horror anthology, and we're currently accepting submissions for the nonfiction anthology up through April 1st. Please join our Discord and come and talk to us about it. We'd love to have your stories, and we'd love to put them into print for you. I've been Miles McNaughton. This has been the Unreal Press Podcast. Thanks for listening. Take care.
Ta-ta and farewell.